Start by explaining why we're doing this.
Sure.
Hey guys, I'm here with Dr. Rendle-Short today for Deep Night. For those of you who maybe haven't been with us on a Deep Night before, what we decided to do was, 2-3 terms ago now, was to take one night each term to talk about a serious issue, sociological issue, something that you might face at school or in your own lives that you can use to help yourself or to help a friend. So last Friday I told you that we're going to be talking about mental health, and so I didn't want to just tell you my own thoughts because that happens too much on social media, doesn't it? So I thought I'll do a bit of research and then I'll get it fact checked by
Fact-checked, okay.
someone in the know-how.
Right, thanks Jordy. Yep.
So what we're going to do is I'm just going to, I've got a few points. So let me rewind again. When I talk about mental health, guys, one of the things I found out quickly was it's kind of hard to cover in a 30-minute session.
Yes.
It's because you've got all kinds of things like anorexia, anxiety, depression, and then not to mention things like schizophrenia and all that kind of thing. So loosely, I think we'll probably talk more about depression and anxiety, and I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Hume, but a lot of the other ones, especially things like anorexia and bulimia, often become connected to depression and anxiety as well.
That's fair comment. Yeah.
So I think we can kind of make some broad stroked comments about this.
Yep.
So I've got a few things that I've done research on. I'm going to talk to Hume about them, and then at the end I'll ask Hume to give us a few ideas of how to move ahead. So, some statistics that I've just got, first of all, is that of the 20% of Australians with a mental illness in any 1 year, so 20% of Australians will have some kind of mental illness in a year, 11.5% of them have one disorder, and 8.5% of them have two or more disorders. Almost half of Australians will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. 54% with mental illness do not access any treatment. So mental disorders and suicide account for 14.2% of Australia's total health burden. So I think that means financial health burden, whatever the government provides for us, which is pretty crazy considering.
Right. And that amount of time that the health providers put into it. Yeah, no, that'd be right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm a GP, so I work in a general practice and see people, obviously, all day type of thing. And we would see mental health many times a day.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's what a person comes about, and sometimes that's not what they come about, but we either identify it or recognise that it's sort of sitting in the background. There's this big spectrum of mental health. There's obviously severe stuff, very severe, and suicide is the end point of severity, the horrible end. But then there's relatively mild, what we would call relatively mild mental health. Mental health doesn't automatically mean that you need tablets and stuff, but if it's impacting on your life and your relationships and your ability at school or work or whatever, then, and it's a problem, then some help is gonna help you with that.
So it would be rare to go a day as a GP without having at least one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was interested to find out whether mental health in Australia is getting worse, because for me at least, it seems like I'm hearing more and more about it. And what I found was, yes, it does seem to be, it's really hard to measure for one thing, but not by as much as we might think. The reason that it seems to come up more and more is that there's more work being done and to make people feel comfortable talking about it, which means that more and more people are coming forward feeling safe to talk to their friends and doctors about it. But I found one statistic, which is from England, so it might have nothing to do from Australia, said that between 1999 and 2017, there was an increase of about 2% in patients bringing it up with. Would you say that's similar?
I'd say that's similar. Certainly, it's less hidden. You know, so back then it was not talked about and more hidden, and people didn't understand it, and I think people put up with it. You know, I remember years ago saying to people, "Oh, you're a real worrier, aren't you?" And these days, a lot of those people, and basically that's the sort of person who everything is worrying. You know, and they can't go through a day without being worried about stuff, being anxious about stuff, being stressed about stuff, about the future, about what's happening to them at the moment, about decisions they've got to make. And I mean, I was talking to a year-old this morning, and yeah, can't go through a day without worrying about the future and worrying about what's going to happen, and whether they make it in life, and even small decisions. Just yeah, they're worries about them. I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that case in a lot of cases, but back in the day we would have just said, "Oh, they're a worrier," whereas these days we would say, "No, this thing called anxiety, or an anxiety disorder." So when we, as doctors, put the word disorder on, that means that it sort of interferes with their life, and certainly totally interfering with this life. Yeah. Suicide rates have crept up. So if you want to use that, you know, when you're looking at your statistics, if you want to use that as a marker, there's no question that suicide rates have stepped up, have gradually increased. So that sort of obviously implies that mental health issues are more common these days than they used to be.
What I found was, when just looking at demographics, is that females are more likely to have mental health issues for whatever reason, probably culture, socio reasons, but males are more likely to act on it in the sense of suicide.
Yeah, certainly when you come to suicide.
Yeah.
So the ones that we as professionals worry about are the so-called silent suiciders, the ones who sort of cover it all up, which is part of, I think, your statistic, that even still, the females tend to talk about it more, whereas blokes tend to just, you know, get on with it and push it down. So the so-called silent suiciders, they're the guys, the blokes that we're worried about, who just keep it down, don't tell anybody. You know, even to the point where I've heard of cases, absolutely, where a guy has, you know, within a doctor's situation, or, you know, a psychologist or therapy situation, has been asked, you know, the question has been put, you know, where are you with suicide and how do you feel about that, etc., and the person says, no, it's all good, and yet does a suicide, you know, within a week, and the guys tend to have what we call more completed suicide. So they tend to do it and do it properly, and bang, it's gone.
Wow.
Whereas the other type of suicide behaviour or suicide stuff, where a person talks about it and does stuff, but doesn't succeed in actually killing themselves, that's less likely amongst the guys compared to the girls.
Okay, wow. So that really talks to the point that it's important, like talking about what you're going through is extremely important in recovery.
Yes, the very first step, and the hardest step. The hardest step for an individual is to open up to somebody, whether that be a friend or a doctor or a family member, or you know, a teacher or a youth worker or whatever. The hardest step, but yet the most important step, is to say to somebody, hey, I need help, or to say to somebody, look, can we have a talk, or can we have a chat sometime? You know, I need to talk to you about some stuff, and you know, whether that conversation, that initial cry for help or expression, I need help, whether that's done in a, you know, very sort of an offhand way. You know, some people say, well, they can't do it in any other way, and that's all cool. It's all good. You know, but they'll make these sort of very heavy statement when you're sort of so-called crossing the road, or you know, waving them off at the bus bus stop
right.
or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and it almost feels like it's not being critical. It's just their way of coping as they do this. It's almost as if they want to say it, but they don't want the follow-up conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas other people will do it in a much more deliberate way.
Planned.
And
Yeah.
say, you know, hey Geordie, you know, can we have a talk sometime? Yeah, let's go out and, you know, kick a ball around and have a talk, or you know, whatever. And they actually ask for that, and then you can, you know, and some people that's what they're comfortable with that. Some people, it's really hard work. It's really hard work. You know, opening your soul to another person.
Yeah.
You know, it takes guts, and it takes trust. A lot comes down to trust. You know, and who the person in trouble picks to talk to. I mean, sometimes it just blurts out. You know, sometimes you have a horrible day and somebody says, "How are you going?" and you just cry, and it's all out there. You know, but yeah, when people actually say, "Hey, I need to talk to somebody," you know, who do you pick? Who do you decide that you're going to talk to? And there's an awful lot of trust that sits there, and respect for that person that you talk to. Yeah.
Like, my next thought then is that the person who's hearing the confession or whatever it is, it's important how they then respond to it.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I've had friends who've told their parents that they're not doing well, whether it's depression, and then their parents have kind of said something along the lines of, "That's just something that teenagers go through."
Yes. Somebody, I was in a workshop once, and this person, a psychologist, was running the workshop. So there was about 20 of us. She made us all sit around in a circle. She gave us a piece of paper and a pencil, right? And she said, "I want you to write on that paper something in your life, the thing that you are most embarrassed about, the thing that you are most feel bad about, the thing that you really hate about yourself the most," right?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's what she said, right? And then she said, "Okay, I'm going to take them up." So she collected them all, and then she screwed them into a ball, and she burnt them.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And what she said was, that's what it feels like as a person who's suffering depression or anxiety or whatever. That first time you talk to somebody. So yeah, you're right. How you respond to somebody talking about that sort of stuff is important. And to be honest, it's relatively easy to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But it's not that hard to say the right thing, because in a lot of ways, the right thing is silence. You know, and to absorb it and to express, you know, to say, you know, I'm hearing what you say, and to say if you have to, you know, look, I don't know exactly, you know, where to take this, but it's all right. It's cool to, you know, and a bit of if you know, if it's all appropriate and stuff, a bit of, you know, physical touch there, pat on the shoulder and stuff like that, or you know, give them a hug or whatever, just to say, look, this is cool. It's okay. Where it's good to. It's the most hard step. It's good to get it out. It's good to open this door, even if it's only a crack, and time, you know. So yeah, you've got to sort of, you know, not look at your watch and just sort of put your phone on silent secretly, and just you know, put time into this situation and say, look, yeah, and behave as if you've got time. You know, let's have a seat, or let's sort of sit down here and we can just sort of, you know, talk about it, etc.
Yeah.
So
something I found a helpful analogy as I was doing my research that I came upon was to think of mental health issues in a similar way to just like physical issues, in the sense that in some cases they're unavoidable.
Yes. But
in nearly all the cases, you can reduce the impact of them.
Yes.
And in some cases, prevent them from even happening in the first place.
Yeah. No. I think that's good. I would add one little thing to that. Often the person who's suffering feels as if it's their fault, right? And obviously in a open conversation like this, you can't generalise, and say, well, it never is their fault, but very often it's not their fault.
Okay.
The obvious examples around that is, I was talking to a sort of late just last week, and we were talking about the guilt that he feels regarding the fact that he was sexually abused around the sort of 10-year-old mark. And I said, intelligent, I said, if you saw a situation where a 10-year-old was being abused sexually, would you say it's the 10-year-old's fault? No. But yet, and then we gently went into the whole idea, was putting the blame on. So I talk with my patients a fair bit about the concept of true guilt and false guilt. So for sure, there's such a thing as true guilt. If you go and steal something, or if you deliberately lie about something, or whatever, and bad stuff happens maybe as a consequence of that, you're guilty. And we know that there's ways to deal with that, and that's to do with forgiveness and prayer and confession and talking with that person and with God, etc., about that, what's happened. So there is a concept of true guilt, but unfortunately there's also this very strong concept of false guilt, and a lot of people with mental illness, whether it's linked to abuse or not, a lot of people with mental illness feel guilty, and they take on that sense of guilt. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that, and partly it's our human nature, and partly it's maybe they've tried talking with somebody at some stage, or stuff that they've heard, or maybe they're making some links to stuff that's happened in the past. So very often it's not from that person actually being guilty, but they feel that. And that's a very, very powerful, incorrect sort of feeling it's very powerful, very hard to turn that sense of guilt and false guilt around. Anyway, I got off track, mate.
No, you're right. No, some of the best stuff comes when you're off track. Okay, so we've talked about talking to someone. Another statistic that I came upon was substance addiction has a strong correlation to mental health issues. In the sense that 75% of people who have substance addiction, and specifically I mean like alcohol and drug addictions, but it could be, I imagine it could be other things like prescribed medication, or overeating, I guess, if you're using that as a source of so 75% of people with some kind of substance addiction have mental health issues.
No, I would agree with that figure. That's the figure that we throw around, 75-80%. And certainly, because I see a lot of people with substance abuse too, and addictions, and sometimes, occasionally, I come across a person and you go through their whole history, and you go through everything, and you say, no, there's no underlying mental health issue here going on. It's purely substance abuse, and the model that, I mean, this is moving into substance abuse, but the model that people talk about there is, the 15, 18, 20-year-old who gets into it because, other kids are doing it, try it, give it a go, I want to see what it feels like, etc., etc. And some of those then, that results in an addictive problem. And you, as I say, you go through the whole history, and no, there's no history of mental health, underlying mental health. On the other hand, you're absolutely right that there's a huge crossover and link up, and one causes the other. Often, mental health sort of leads to or makes substance abuse so much easier that it happens. And sometimes it works the other way around. So some substances can actually cause pretty severe mental health. A number of substances can cause mental health issues.
Can cause them, but also it makes a kind of lifestyle that makes you spiral downwards, and then your lifestyle kind of causes the mental health as well?
Yeah, no, that's right. A lot of it comes down to, a lot of it's around lifestyle, and that doesn't mean rich or poor or living in a sort of squatty little flat somewhere or living in in an average house. It's more how you approach your life. There's certainly a crossover between mental health and substance abuse there.
So, someone who has initially had a mental health issue and it's driven them to abuse drugs or alcohol.
Yes.
And they come to you and they're in a hole because they've got both issues, the mental health and the substance addiction. How do you untangle that? What do you deal with first?
I'm
not sure if I'll put this in the
thing. That's right. You gotta approach. I mean, it is a tangle, and you've got to approach both, ideally, or to get the best results. If the person can deal with the substance issue first, then we can see what's left,
what's remaining,
and because the actual substances themselves confuse the brain and confuse the mental well-being of that person. So while a person is actively using substances, it's really hard to get them to change. Every time they want to change, they've got this this huge drive of where am I going to get my fix tomorrow, or I need the stuff or whatever. And it's also a bit like when somebody's intoxicated. There's a thing. If somebody's off their head drunk, you can support them, but you can't really talk about important substance issues and things. And so I get a number of people who are very erratic in their drug use and sort of at times very off their heads, and they're driven by using it every day, and they know and I know that there's deep mental health sadness and damage going on underneath, but you can't get to it. And every time you try and unearth it, then that causes them stress and distress, so they go back to the gear. So it's
hard.
Yes, that's a very difficult topic.
They need God.
To
over-generalize
it. They need to make the decision. I'm going to do something.
So this one I suspect is going to be more controversial, and that is maybe it's not going to cure the mental health issue, but it might help it, and that is diet. I read some research that talked about the microbiome in the sense that it actually affects the brain a fair bit. And while it's hard to find anyone who agrees about diet, there is like a few simple principles, such as avoiding a lot of sugar and avoiding simple carbohydrates like a lot of white bread, pasta. And the reason being is just because one, it's bad for your health, but secondly, because it releases energy more slowly and means that you won't have spikes in tiredness and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't think it's that controversial. I think the controversy or the unknown, I'd say the unknown, is around the biome stuff and the what the bugs in the gut are doing to affect different ways in which the brain works. I mean, that's still being worked out. But the general principles, and I broaden it out to lifestyle. So whenever we get somebody any mental health, one of the very first and basic principles is the 4 or 5 lifestyle factors. Exercise, absolutely, 100%. Getting out of the house.
Oh, good.
Doing stuff.
I've got that down here.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting out of the house, doing stuff, exercising on a regular basis. So that's a big one. Diet, absolutely. And it's basic normal diet principles. You're right, less sugar, less fat, more vegetables, balance in your diet, less sort of takeaways, what some of the people are these days calling slow food, home cooked sort of slow food, rather than the fast sort of just go and get a Macca's type of stuff. Sorry, but that's the evidence is there. It's true. But I would add to the diet also a pattern or a sort of a routine. You know, I don't mean, you know, meals exactly the right time every day, that sort of stuff. But fasting or you know, sort of hard dieting and skipping breakfast and you know, eating the sugary stuff before you go to bed is really you know, is just bad news for mental health stuff.
Yep.
Sleep and your sleep pattern and your sleep habits, you know, if you're often, not uncommon, mental health is associated with sleep difficulties. And if you're, you know, sort of burning the lights right late and going out, you know, till really late, you know, a few times a week, that's going to screw up your sleep, and in turn, it's going to affect your mental health. What other lifestyle? So some sort of pattern, balance, you know, balance between again, exercise and sort of doing solo stuff, those sorts of things. Trying not to spend too much time, you know, on your own in your own bedroom, you know, sort of just you and the internet or you and the TV or whatever. Yeah, so that's where that sort of balance comes in. Community, absolutely, community, friends, looking at that and you know, doing stuff and talking just about life, not about deep stuff, but just you know, just having people around you and living in a, that's how we're meant to be, you know. And then there's a final one. I mean, these are all important. I've got a doctor friend who says you need to have something that you can laugh at every day or laugh about every day. So happy environments. I've got this patient, I think I mentioned before, one of them, and one of my has been very depressed for some time, anorexia and so forth. And one of my goals, and I've said one of my goals when we have our consultations, is that smile at least 5 times per consultation.
Wow.
You know, because we know medically that smiling, laughing, doing stuff that's fun, doing stuff that's exciting, and that's all part of what we said before, exercise and community and all that sort of thing. It improves the good neurotransmitters in the brain. No question at all. Yeah, it improves them. Yeah. So forcing yourself, encouraging your friend who you think's depressed, you know, sort of, you know, getting them out into the into the park or whatever you're going to do together and doing some good, you know, something physical. The physical stuff literally burns off the anxiety neurotransmitters.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're super anxious about something, you know, if you can go and exercise, it will literally burn off those neurotransmitters.
That's really interesting, because I got another point here, and that was this I didn't actually read in a study; it was in a podcast.
Yeah.
And what the doctor in the podcast was saying was, humans were historically were built for high stress life and death situations.
Yeah.
And our cortisol response in stressful situations triggers to help us be able to respond to them and avoid them in the future. But in our current lifestyle, where we've got very few life and death situations, our old system is still there, and so it starts to our bodies get confused, and it starts to fire in situations that are not life and death, and very often not really a big deal, but you just can't stop the cortisol coming.
That's right.
And what she was saying is exercise.
Yeah.
Exercise makes the body stressed, and maybe you do produce cortisol when you exercise. I don't know.
You produce stuff called endorphins.
Yeah.
We know that, and it it helps the cortisol production. Yeah.
But the idea is that you burn that off while you exercise, and then you don't experience it later on.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So all this stuff sounds good, but it actually works. It literally actually works. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, and this is more from experience rather than anything I've found, is that when I was in high school, I noticed grade 11, grade 12 specifically, I avoided breakfast because I just have to say it, I was a bit lazy in making breakfast. And then also making my own lunch, I was slack. Not that Mum didn't have enough food or anything, I was just slack in making it. And those 2 years, I really struggled with my own mental health.
Yeah.
And as I look back and think about my own eating habits now, I think I would have done a lot better if I had big breakfasts with,
a proper breakfast. Yeah, no, that's right.
So another study that I found was interesting, and I'll kind of change tack after the first statement, is that people who lived in wealthy neighborhoods but were on the lower end of wealth were more likely to commit suicide. And the study was kind of talking about the fact that people who kind of compare themselves to their wealthy neighbors or are just in situations all the time where they want to be like someone have issues with mental health. And the reason that I think this is important to youth, because I don't think any of you own houses, but I think it's important to youth because of social media, in the sense that we follow the people who we think are the most famous, the people who we like the most, and even our friends who are the most popular, we follow them, and so we're seeing the most successful, the highest scoring in sports, intelligence, looks, all those things.
No, I agree.
And if we have that mindset of comparing, there's a high danger of I don't know what that's called, like anxiety, depression, or a need to be better. And I guess what it is, self-worth. That's what it is.
It comes down to self-worth. It comes down to dissatisfaction with your own lot, and I'm not good enough, and other people are better than me. And I think, we know that adolescence, teenage years, is a vulnerable time for mental health, and I think a lot of that comes from this whole concept that adolescents are trying to work out who they are and find themselves and what they're going to do, and there's a lot of expectations on them and that sort of thing, and it produces this underlying anxiety about who I am and what's the future, and am I going to live up to everything, and am I good enough now, and what do other people think of me, and I can't wear that, or I can't look like this, and I think all of that stuff was true when you went through and when I grew up, which was years and years ago. I think it was all true back then, but in some way, few things in the current society have sort of added pressure to that. One of them, big time, is social media. And I think the other one is the ability to get something that's perfect. We look at the shine on a brand new car, and basically it's a perfect finish. It is a perfect finish. And we want it to stay as a perfect finish for the next 5 years. Whereas 50 years ago, the paint jobs weren't that good. And they didn't get a perfect finish. And so back then, there wasn't this expectation that everything has to have that perfectness to it. And I think it definitely shows up in clothes and sort of makeup and appearance, and how we display ourselves, and I think social media feeds it.
The interesting thing I found was, so younger people seem to suffer from social media in the sense of self-worth, but older people and the elderly, there's studies to show that their loneliness, which is incredibly serious amongst older people, is helped by it. So they seem to get some kind of positive reward from social media.
Oh no, I get that. It's not all bad.
Which just goes to show is social media is not the enemy. It's what's in our heads as we look through social media, as we compare ourselves to other people. So we can still use it. We just have to be incredibly careful of what's going through our minds as we're looking at things.
And is it helping? Is it helping me to.
That's a good point, because older people would typically use social media to connect with their family and friends. And like children and stuff like that, whereas young people maybe I'm overgeneralizing here. Young people, I think, go to look at it more to measure themselves against other people.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. And the ultimate, or one of the bad examples of all of that, is cyberbullying and social media, abuse and bullying and all that sort of stuff. And that's sort of the bad example of that. Yeah.
We talked about exercise. Here's one. Here's an interesting one. So, I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson. And I just remember one talk that he gave once, and it talked about what's that fear? I think I've got down here agoraphobia, which is the fear of
going out.
Yeah.
So agoraphobics are people who won't go out, who won't socialise, who have to stay at home. Yeah.
He talked about his patients, because he was a clinical psychologist. He talked about the fact that often these fears would start with a lady's just driving her car, she's going to the shopping centre, and all of a sudden she starts to panic, and she doesn't know why she starts to panic, but she's driving and it gets worse and worse and worse. Anyway, whether she ends up hospitalised is unimportant. She has an experience, and she's determined then to avoid it at all costs. So she decides, I'm not going to drive on that street anymore. Yeah. But the problem is she has it another time when she's in the shops. And then she learns, she puts in her head, okay, I'm not going to go to those shops anymore. Then it's just like meeting with friends and family, and she has the panic attack again. And so she decides that she's not going to go there until it gets worse and worse and worse, until she or he is afraid of everything. Yes. And the lesson, the point there is when you avoid something that has made you scared or made you stress out, it can make it much worse. And so here's a lesson. I would like to know what you think about this. Is this a good rule to live by? Don't avoid stressful or difficult situations, with the long-term view of you'll actually be less stressed and things will be less difficult for you if you confront them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a reasonable generalisation. So what you're talking about is avoidance behaviour, people who avoid situations and as you say, they sort of gradually build up.
I'm kind of thinking also anxiety-wise. If being in large crowds of people makes you anxious, if talking to an older person or an adult makes you anxious, does that mean then you should avoid those situations? Or does it in fact mean, okay, should I consider doing it more often on purpose?
So it depends on the degree and depends on the severity, and how much it's affecting you. And so I would come back a step and say, if you recognise that that's happening to yourself and that it is getting worse, and as you just illustrated, it started off with one or two situations and now it's half a dozen situations. Definitely, I would say I would advise talking to somebody and bringing that out into the open before it becomes all and everything and you're totally locked in your house and won't go anywhere. So I would definitely say that. What you're saying, sort of what we call exposure or exposing yourself to that situation, living through the fear and living through the anxiety and then overcoming it, it is very much a principle of therapy for people who have got these avoidance anxiety situations severely. So it's very much a part of our therapy. However, it would be done in a managed, controlled, graduated sense, right? So, for example, if somebody's got genuinely has got a fear and anxiety around spiders and gets panic attacks, etc. So we would start off with thinking about a spider, or maybe listening to a story about a spider, or maybe having a photograph of a small spider way up on the roof there that you can scarcely see. We, in a therapy sense, we wouldn't at all start off with, okay, the first step is to pat a huntsman. We'd sort of start way back, and we would manage that and talk about the anxiety that it So it would be a managed therapeutic approach to that. So if you're talking about somebody who's got a bad, don't force that on your friends.
Don't tell them to toughen up. And
no, precisely. Don't tell them to toughen up. That comment, "Hey, toughen up and face it," is a loaded statement. You know, and it's really hard to tell. You know, you might be out at the the local waterhole and everybody's jumping off a 20-foot log or whatever, and one of the guys just sort of doesn't want to do it. You've got to be careful. Just say toughen up and do it. I've done it with my eyes closed. I'll do it with you, whatever, just do it. You've got to be careful. You don't know that kid's story. You don't know why that fear. There might be something really serious. Like, I don't know, somebody who fell from a height and died, I don't know, in that kid's background. So the comment toughen up is really hard. I mean, I think not that you were saying that, you were sort of saying to yourself, and I think early on, yes, it's good to be able to do that and to be able to, because basically that's what you need to do. But I guess what I'm saying is, if you need help to do that, then that's okay. Seek out the help, etc. But
it's a tension, isn't it? I think of the classic scenario where someone says, "Well, I'm an introvert, so I don't want to go into a social setting," but then they've also got. I can also see in them that they are more happy when they are more frequently going into social settings, and so for them, you don't chase high social, lots of people settings, but expose yourself a little bit to it. For the same reason, extroverts should probably practice the opposite, and that is, if they struggle with solitude, maybe they should expose themselves to it.
Experience what it feels like.
What else we got here? This one was hard because as a Christian, I encourage the youth and other Christians to befriend people who are struggling, and maybe even people that you might initially think are bad influences.
Yes.
But there's so much evidence to say that if you have good friends who are supportive, you tend to do much better. And so that's something that I'm confused about. I guess there's a tension there in that you have to monitor yourself with how you're doing.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the lesson that I found as I was researching was choose your friends wisely, friends that uplift you, who are not in the friendship for selfish motivations.
Yes. So I would use the word balance. If you hang around totally people who are very negative, very depressed, possibly drug users, whatever, you are at significant risk of getting sucked into that. And you have to be a very strong person in yourself and in God to be able to work in that area. So where the concept of balance comes in is, if you're called to that area, or you land in that area, and that's just sort of who happens to be around about you, do everything you can to balance that out, both with good, healthy, strong other relationships and with your relationship with God, to balance it out. I mean, I think we all know that you can't go into challenging environments without God, without God's assistance, and without God's appointment for you to do that, without God's calling, for you to do that. And it's absolutely true. But I guess I'm saying, and also part of that is to have supportive people. I mean, we've all heard of missionaries and that sort of thing who go overseas into totally alien environments where they don't have any other support at all. But wow, you've got to have a strong calling to do that. Absolutely, you've got to. Whereas, as a general rule of thumb, if you're finding yourself, hanging out with people who are struggling in their own way, whatever that be, Make sure that you balance that with other good, strong relationships, and talk about it within those strong relationships. You know, this is what's happening in my life, and this is who I'm hanging out with, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for people who want to try to help someone who's struggling, I think I would say go ahead, but don't feel guilty if you find you have to back away.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
I think this might be my final one. So limiting time in fantasy worlds, and let me extrapolate that a little bit.
Yes.
One big one is online gaming, and I know there's a lot of boys who are not going to be happy about me saying this. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's completely bad. And I'm not just talking to boys either. I'm talking about never-ending Netflix shows that are just so intriguing, and you can find yourself stuck in them and so interested in knowing what's happening next. I'm talking about books, and this is one for me, like fantasy books, fiction books, where I just find myself being the character and getting stuck. I think all those things are okay if you can do it in a measured way. And the reason is because as you spend more and more time in it, you become more and more invested in the life of that pretend world over the life of the real world. Things become less interesting in the real world when you've got the other world to go to, and motivation becomes harder. I found some statistics, particularly about online gaming for people who had problematic issues with it. They were less able to cope with stressful situations. They had lower self-esteem, developed a preference for solitude, and schooling was a huge issue.
So just taking that first one, because it's a bit of a generalised, I think it's true. They're less able to cope with stressful situations. Because in the game environment, if you've got a stressful situation, you fix it now. And you either fix it or not, you wipe out, or you fix it, and you say, well, that was good, etc. But in real life, stress isn't like that. You know, if you've got a stressful situation, whether that be at school or at home or, you know, with the guys on the footy team or whatever, you can't just fix it like that. You've got to work your way through that, and it might take a few days, it might take a week or whatever to actually be able to work out, okay, what's going on and what do I need to do, and you know, where can I get advice, and even when then you try something that doesn't totally work and you think, okay, what am I going to do now? So there's an immediacy about this, about the fantasy world and the games and that sort of thing. There's an immediacy that says, just do this and it'll fix it, you know, and that's not actually how the real life works.
Yep. And I think the other thing is if your life looks so much better in the fantasy world and you're leveled up in the social hierarchy of the other people online, you're going to prefer that over to the life that you really haven't invested much time into. And so I think from that is if you, so once again, I'm not saying that online gaming, that Netflix is bad, that books are bad, but I am saying if you don't have another hobby that is in some way edifying to your real life, whether it's exercise, it's got some kind of financial benefit, helps you to de-stress, something in the real world that you can invest your time into as a hobby, I would say get one.
Yes. Yeah. And these things actually do work. You know, I've seen people who have got mental illness, who we go through this stuff and, you know, talk about all this lifestyle balance. It all comes back to that balance in your life and getting rid of some of the negative stuff. And it really, really does make them different. Yeah, does improve them. And they have more smiles. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we might we're going to finish up soon, guys, but probably one question, Hume.
Yep.
Two questions, and you've already covered them, but perhaps we could make them more succinct.
Yeah.
Let's say that there is a youth listening to this that has an issue with mental health. It could be
Yep.
depression, anxiety,
Yep.
anorexia. What would you say is the most important thing for them to do in the next few weeks?
Yes. Recognize in their own head that yes, things aren't right, and then to find somebody to talk to. So I spend a lot of time with parents and with teenage kids talking about this concept that we all need. I need it, you need it, everybody needs it. Some people in our lives, some mates, that we can have big proper conversations with, periodically when we need to, and we need to feed that, we need to make that happen. And then the next part of that is, it doesn't matter who that person is, right? That's a scary statement, but I mean, I say, because people say, oh, so we need to find them a good counsellor, or go along to the school counsellor or the chappie or and absolutely, if you're cool going and talking to them, 100%, do that. Go and talk to the chappie or the guidance officer or your teacher or your youth leader or whatever. Go and talk to them, and they will genuinely, be able to help you. But if you're too scared to talk to them and it's anybody else, find somebody that you can talk to. And that comes down to trust and stuff, but
Great. And last question, say we've got a friend who tomorrow we go to school and they tell me, not that I go to school, but if I did, Geordie, I've got this issue, I've just been depressed, I didn't know who to tell. What should my response be to them? And I think you did cover this a little bit.
So but I'll cover off a couple of other quick things. In a way, that's the backside of the question we just asked. If you're in trouble, go and talk to somebody. Okay, what happens if somebody comes and talks to me? Take a big breath. Settle down your own nerves. Say, hey, this might take time. Listen. Listen. Look at them and lean forward. Listen. Try to understand their world. Let them talk about it. Right. So that's, I think, what to do in the immediate sense and in the up front when it happens. But I think there's a couple of principles that we probably just need to mention that sit behind that, right? And the two question marks that I would say is what we call confidentiality or privacy. What do you do with that? And linked to that is, how do I cope with that? I've just had this stuff dumped on my shoulders, and it might be serious. It might use that word suicide, and I personally don't be afraid to ask about suicide. Hey, is it so bad that you've thought of doing yourself in, or hurting yourself, or cutting, or what do you how bad is it? And if the conversation, you think, well, I need to. If you think of it, if you're the listener and you think, well, I'm worried here, I need to ask, or this could be a suicide or a cutting or a self-harm or whatever. If you think about it, then don't be afraid to ask, because the other person probably wants you to ask. People worry, they're scared. Mate, if I do that, that'll put ideas into their head. No, the ideas are already there.
Yeah.
If I do that, that'll make them go and do stuff.
They won't tip them over the edge.
Yeah, that's right. No. It gives them a release valve. It gives them a relief valve to say, hey, and you might even be able to enter into a bit of an agreement with that person and say, hey, look, if that person is really seriously talking about hurting themselves or suicide, hey, just hold off, give it a day or two, and we'll, you might be able to get some sort of contract out of them. So don't be afraid of that. You've really got to walk away from that conversation, working out in your own head, can I handle this on my own, or do I need to talk to somebody? Now, as a doctor and as a psychologist, we have got an absolute confidentiality rule. So I can tell anybody that if they go and talk to a doctor or a psychologist or a counsellor about any of this stuff, that stuff will be kept confidential, right? But if you talk to a friend, those confidentiality rules don't exist or aren't strong like that. And as the friend, as the person who's being, helping, I would probably suggest have a talk about with the person who's in trouble. Okay, this is pretty heavy stuff. Is it okay if I go and talk with somebody? You can make up hypothetical situations. You can go and talk to somebody away from it. Go and talk to your GP about it, who doesn't know the situation. And then you're entering into a confidentiality arrangement. So in other words, that's sort of all covered by that and it's all cool. I mean, we do say to people, and it's the truth, if people come to me, especially if they're under 18 and I am worried about their health and safety, then I will tell them up front that sometimes I would then have a duty to break that confidentiality rule and to talk about something. So you've really, as the helper, you've got to, I'd say maintain a relationship and offer more, for it to happen again, etc., etc. But then you've really got to look after, okay, what on earth am I going to do with this, and where am I going with this? And if you really don't know, go and talk to Geordie and make it hypothetical and just say, a friend at school, and it happens to be a friend in the youth group who doesn't go to the same school as you, lie a little bit. I've got this friend at school and this is what they've been telling me, what do you reckon, where am I going to go, what am I going to do? Don't, I think it's unfair and unrealistic to carry that all on your own shoulders unless you've got experience in that area. Heavy stuff. That part of it, the whole subject's heavy, but that part, can get heavy.
It's an important point, and even as youth leaders, I think this is important for the youth to know, is we want youth to be able to tell us what's going on if they have mental health issues. And that can be confidential up until a point, and that point is if we feel like you're telling us that you're in harm's way at all. And at that point, we are obliged to contact someone, parents, and then someone else if we need to as well.
Yes, that is correct. However, because I've had to do this on occasions, sometimes, we would always do it in an environment of helping the person to do it. So we wouldn't do it. I would never do it behind somebody's back.
Oh, good.
Ever. I would always say, look, this is serious stuff. We need to work out how we're going to deal with this. And yes, I do need to let so and so know.